The skyscraper shimmered like a blade of glass against the morning sun, each pane reflecting the city's ambition. Somewhere between the 63rd and 64th floors, a harnessed figure moved with practiced ease. She wasn't supposed to be seen, but he saw her. Adelaide Lin wiped her cloth across the window with slow, deliberate movements. Her fingers were numb from the wind, but her mind sharper than ever. Her uniform was plain, a navy blue jumpsuit, heavy gloves, boots worn from months of work. But underneath that disguise, she carried the blood of royalty, the legacy of a dynasty buried in secrets. She had returned, not for revenge, not yet, but to see if the empire her family once owned still breathed within the walls of Lin Global Holdings, the company built on her father's ashes and now ruled by the man who destroyed them. "Stop staring," she muttered to herself as her eyes flicked inside. Through the thick pane of glass, she caught a glimpse of him, Kieran Lin, CEO of Lin Global, billionaire, ruthless, unreachable. He was taller than she remembered, sharper. The last time she saw him, she was 17 and running through the fire of scandal. Now, at 23, she was back, not as Adelaide Lin, Lost Heiress, but as Addie, the nameless window cleaner with a secret. Inside the office, Kieran's expression didn't flinch. His eyes, cold gray like winter steel, met hers through the glass. For a second, the world held its breath. Did he recognize her? She dropped her gaze, focused on the smudge she hadn't yet wiped. Her heart pounded. No, 6 years was a long time. She was a ghost now, a shadow he'd long buried. Inside, Kieran narrowed his eyes. There was something about the girl outside his window, something unshakably familiar. But his phone rang, slicing through the thought. "Yes?" "Board meeting in 5 minutes, Mr. Lin." He barely nodded and stood, but as he left his office, he took one last glance at the figure in blue. Later that afternoon, Adelaide stepped out of the maintenance locker room and slipped on a beige hoodie over her jumpsuit. She took the back stairwell down 20 floors, then the elevator, then disappeared into the chaos of the city. Her reflection ghosted in the mirrored glass of every building she passed. She had to stay invisible. Nobody at Lin Global knew who she really was, and that was the plan. Years ago, her father had entrusted the company to a young protege, Kieran Lin, after a sudden illness. But 3 months later, her father had died. The will was missing. The empire was gone. Her family vanished. Adelaide had spent 6 years in hiding, learning, watching, waiting. Now she was back, working under a false name She knew every corridor, every executive, every lie. What she didn't, that strange. So why did she? At midnight, she sat alone in her tiny apartment, flipping through old photos. Her parents, the grand estate in the countryside, her father's hands, always warm. The last one was a photo of Kieran and her. He was 20, she was 17. He was smiling at it, she was too. "I won't forget," she whispered to herself. "I won't forgive." The city below whispered secrets in the dark, and the storm was coming. Adelaide was no longer the lost heiress. She was the girl behind the glass, and tomorrow she'd make her first move. The wind bit at Clara's cheeks as she balanced atop the steel scaffolding on the 28th floor of Archvale Tower, cloth in one hand, squeegee in the other. The city stretched below her in a blur of steel and light, but her reflection in the glass was crystal clear. Chestnut hair tucked into a messy bun, freckles dusting her nose, a hoodie 3 washes past its prime, she was unrecognizable to the world that used to know her as Clara Ellington. Now, just the new girl. The one who never took off her gloves, the one who refused to answer questions about her past, the one who knew every inch of this building, because she grew up in it. Every creak in the walls, every gleam of sunlight on the boardroom windows, every scuff on the marble tiles in the CEO's private elevator. It was all too familiar, but none of them recognized her, and that was exactly how she needed it to be. She descended from the scaffolding, muscles aching, fingertips raw. As she stepped into the janitor's hallway, the quiet hum of the building's systems surrounded her, a far cry from the luxury suites above. Nina, her supervisor, popped her head out from the closet. "You're done early again. You some kind of ninja or just trying to prove something?" Clara offered a small smile. "Just good at cleaning up messes." Nina grunted in approval, handing her a new assignment slip. "CEO's office, fingerprints on the balcony glass." Clara froze. Julian Thorne's office. Her pulse quickened, memories rushing in like a tide she thought she had buried. The last time she stood in that room, she was 17, dressed in black lace. Her father had been laid to rest just days before, and the boardroom was filled with vultures, lawyers, shareholders, and one cold-eyed boy who watched her like she was a problem to be solved, not a daughter in mourning. Julian had taken over everything, the empire, the name, the power. And she vanished. Now, 8 years later, she walked back in through the side door like a ghost. The office hadn't changed much. Floor-to-ceiling windows cast golden light across polished wood and brushed steel. A minimalist sculpture stood by the bookshelf, and behind the executive desk, a single white orchid bloomed, just like the one her mother used to keep. Clara moved quietly, cloth pressed to the glass. She told herself she wouldn't look through it, but she did. There he was, Julian Thorne, CEO, billionaire, power broker, her father's protege, and the boy who used to bring her ice cream when no one was watching. He stood on the balcony, back turned, navy suit impeccable, hands clasped behind him like a man born to command the sky. Clara's hand trembled as she wiped. He turned. She ducked out of view just in time. Or, later, in the staff locker room, Clara's name echoed off the walls. "Bennett," Nina shouted, "you've been summoned." "Summoned?" Clara repeated. "Yeah, CEO's office. Now." Her stomach dropped. Ice spread through her spine. She climbed the stairs this time. She didn't want to be escorted like a child or an employee caught stealing. When she entered the office, Julian wasn't at his desk. He stood by the orchid, fingers tracing the petals. "You cleaned my window?" Clara nodded. "That's my job." He turned, and for a terrifying second, she thought he recognized her. But no, just another blank stare. Julian gestured to the couch. "Sit." Clara didn't move. "Sit," he repeated. She obeyed, back straight, hands folded on her lap like she wasn't trying to stop them from shaking. "There's a gala tomorrow," Julian said. "My fiancé canceled. I need a new one." Clara blinked. "You want me to find someone?" "I want you to be someone." Silence fell like a hammer. "Excuse me?" He walked toward her, every step precise. "It's a simple arrangement. You dress up, you smile, you say nothing. In return, I double your salary and erase your debts." Clara's breath caught. "You don't even know me." Julian studied her for a long moment. "No," he said softly, "I don't." And that was how she knew. He truly didn't recognize her. The girl who once played piano in his father's drawing room. The girl who cried at her father's grave while Julian signed the final merger that took away everything her family built. She clenched her jaw. "Fine," she said, "but I wear my own dress." She wasn't supposed to be here, not in the boardroom, not standing opposite the CEO of Archvale Corporation, with sun-dusted windows casting golden light across her worn jeans and paint-streaked hoodie. But Clara stood her ground. Julian Thorne's stare was razor-sharp as always, too practiced, too unreadable. He tilted his head ever so slightly, as if she were a strange painting he couldn't decide whether to frame or discard. "I asked for the windows, not the floor," he said, voice crisp. Clara tightened her grip on the handle of her bucket. There was a spill. It would have caused an accident. A pause. Silence stretched thin. "And here I thought you were hired to clean glass, not play hero." She should have flinched. Most people did under his tone. But Clara had learned to stop shrinking under a man's voice, especially not one like his. "Then fire me," she said, lifting her chin. It was a dare, and she knew it. Julian walked closer, the echo of his designer shoes a rhythmic warning. "I could." "You could," Clara repeated, her pulse suddenly aware of the proximity. "But I don't think you will." Something flickered in his gaze. Amusement? Annoyance? Or something else she couldn't name? Later that evening, Clara sat atop the rooftop garden, her legs dangling over the edge of the steel beam she wasn't technically allowed to be on. City lights blinked beneath her, like stars fallen too far. The hum of engines below was constant, an urban lullaby that didn't soothe, only reminded. She clutched her necklace, a silver heart with initials she never spoke aloud, her father's. She hadn't set foot inside Thorn Tower since the funeral. And now here she was, back, hiding under bleach-stained gloves and a mop. "You always liked heights," a voice said behind her. She whipped her head around. Julian. He looked almost human up here. No tailored posture, no glare, just a man with his hands in his pockets, the wind tugging at the open collar of his shirt. "What are you doing up here?" she asked. He didn't answer right away. "I wanted to see what the window cleaner finds so fascinating." Clara smirked, gesturing at the lights. "Freedom." Julian stepped closer. "Funny, most people would say power. Those aren't the same thing." Another silence. She glanced sideways. "You ever wonder how many stories you're missing, buried under boardrooms and bottom lines?" His eyes were on her now, not her clothes, not her smudged cheeks. Her. "All the time," he said. Clara froze. That wasn't the answer she expected. Their gazes held, something shifting unspoken between them. The city roared below, but up here, it felt like time stalled. Julian looked away first. "I don't like mysteries," he said. Clara smiled bitterly. "Then stay away from me." The wind was sharp that morning, slicing through Clara's worn uniform, as she stood atop the scaffold on the 22nd floor. The city below buzzed like a distant memory, too far away to hear, yet too close to forget. The glass in front of her was pristine, but she kept wiping, not because it was dirty, because she needed to stay invisible. Invisible was safe. Inside the glass, just beyond the faint layer of condensation, was the man who now occupied her thoughts far more than she cared to admit. Julian Vale, CEO, Empire's heir, king of the skyline. He wasn't supposed to notice a girl like her, especially not one dressed in overalls with a name patch stitched hastily on the chest, especially not one whose real name wasn't even on that patch. But yesterday, he had. And today, as if destiny had a strange sense of humor, he stood in front of the very window she was cleaning. Clara froze. Julian didn't move either. His eyes were dark today, and they held her for one long second too many. There was no dismissive arrogance in his expression like the first day, just quiet, restrained curiosity, as if he was trying to remember where he'd seen her before, or more frighteningly, who she reminded him of. She forced herself to look away, brushing the last invisible streak from the corner of the pane. But her fingers trembled, not from fear, from recognition. Because now she could see it clearly too. The slight curve of his smile wasn't just businessman's charm. It was the same smile from the old family photos locked in her mother's chest. The same features her mother once whispered about when she told bedtime stories, not of kings and castles, but of shareholders and betrayals. Julian Vale wasn't just a stranger. He was her father's oldest enemy. And somehow, fate had placed her one floor away from him with a squeegee in one hand and the weight of a broken dynasty in the other. Downstairs, in the janitor's room turned makeshift apartment, Clara peeled off her damp uniform and stared at her reflection in the small mirror. Her face looked older than it had the week before, more alert, more haunted. She reached for her phone and opened the encrypted app hidden behind a weather app icon. A single unread message blinked at the top. Phase 1 complete. He's watching. Don't break cover. Clara inhaled slowly, then exhaled. They were right. Julian had started noticing her, watching her, And if he kept doing so, he might dig deep enough to discover she wasn't just a window cleaner, not just another girl on payroll, but the heiress he thought had died along with her mother in the fire he and his board had conveniently buried. Clara snapped the phone shut and tucked it beneath her mattress. She couldn't afford mistakes. Not now. Not now, when she was this close. Later that afternoon, Julian paced in his office, distracted. His assistant was droning on about investment mergers, but his eyes kept drifting toward the window. The girl from this morning lingered in his mind like fog on a mirror. She was too graceful, too careful, too familiar. "Sir?" the assistant asked. Julian turned. "Get me personnel files on the cleaning crew." The assistant blinked. "All of them?" Julian nodded. "Start with the new hires, especially the ones who came through that private contractor this month." He wasn't sure what he was looking for yet, but something told him, something deep, instinctual, that the girl behind the glass wasn't who she claimed to be. And he was going to find out exactly what secrets she was hiding. The hum of the service elevator was the only sound in the narrow shaft, but Clara's heart beat louder. She stood still, arms crossed, back straight, her reflection in the mirrored metal walls showing a young woman who looked like a cleaner, yes, but not one who belonged here, not anymore, not with what she was about to do. The door opened with a soft ding. Level 47, the executive floor. She stepped out, wheeling a janitor's cart as her cover. No one looked twice. Why would they? Cleaners were invisible. It was the very thing she relied on. She navigated past the boardroom, the silent conference suites, and stopped outside the frosted glass office marked Julian Vale, Chief Executive Officer. Her hand lingered on the brass handle, not to open the door, but to listen. Inside, he was on a call. His voice was low, curt. "No, I don't trust them either. Pull the contract, restructure the deal, quietly." Silence. Then, "And get me everything you can on Clara." Clara's breath caught. She leaned closer, heart hammering in her chest. Julian's voice dropped further, laced with suspicion. "Yes, the cleaner. I want background checks, history, family, everything." Clara's grip tightened on the cart. She forced her expression blank and spun it around just as the door clicked open. Julian stepped out, phone still pressed to his ear, and froze the moment he saw her. Their eyes locked. For the briefest moment, neither spoke. Clara could see the question burning in his gaze, half certainty, half disbelief. She lowered her head and nodded politely. "Excuse me, sir." His eyes narrowed. He moved aside but didn't turn his back. "You're new." "Yes, sir," she answered, her voice calm but firm. "What's your name?" Clara smiled faintly. "Emily." A beat. She saw the moment doubt flickered in his eyes, but he didn't press it. "Be careful around this floor," he said flatly. "Security's tight for a reason." "Yes, sir." Clara walked away, the echo of his voice following her like a warning, like a challenge. Back in her quarters that night, Clara peeled off her uniform and stood in front of the mirror. She was tired of pretending, tired of hiding. From the drawer beneath her cot, she pulled out the manila folder she'd been hiding for years. Inside were her mother's documents, the original blueprints of the Vale Corp expansion, plans her mother co-authored before they were stolen, before Julian's board forced her out, before the fire. She unfolded the last page. At the bottom of the blueprint, 2 signatures. Julian Vale, Serena Bennett, her mother. Clara stared at them both. The truth burned behind her eyes, hot and alive. She wasn't just cleaning windows anymore. She was cleaning up a legacy. Meanwhile, Julian sat alone in his penthouse, swirling a glass of scotch. He'd just received the first of the background reports. Something didn't match. No one by the name Emily had checked in through the third-party cleaning service. No records, no ID logs, no camera footage from the loading dock. And yet, she was there. Every day. Moving like she belonged. He set the glass down and stared out over the city skyline. There was a ghost in his building. and ghosts didn't appear without a reason. The next morning came drenched in silver fog, the kind that swallowed the city skyline and muffled the clamor of morning traffic. Clara wore her uniform like armor, but beneath it, her pulse throbbed with purpose. She had a new plan. The folder of documents, her mother's legacy, wasn't just paper, it was a key. And keys only mattered if they unlocked something. Today, she would find out what. She timed her route carefully. Cleaners weren't allowed near the central archives, but she had memorized the janitorial schedule by heart. The 8:10 a.m. shift rotated the cleaning carts on the 40th floor. If she got there before the supervisor's rounds, she could blend in, just long enough to slip into the server room. At 8:07, she was inside. The hum of machinery buzzed around her as she slid between the tall black towers of Veil Corp's digital core. She wasn't a hacker, but she didn't need to be. Her mother had taught her enough. Clara pulled a small USB stick from her sleeve and inserted it into the back of a console marked Legacy Archive. The screen flickered. A password prompt appeared. She typed B3NNET. Access granted. Clara's fingers flew over the keyboard, eyes scanning the folders. She wasn't ready for what she saw. There, buried under project names and corporate red tape, was a hidden directory. Seraphim Initiative, her mother's final project. The files were encrypted. She downloaded what she could. Just as she was pulling the drive out, the door creaked open. Clara froze. Footsteps. Mail. Measured. She ducked behind a tower, heart pounding. A voice called out, "I know someone's here." It was Julian. Clara's breath caught. She peeked through a narrow gap, his silhouette framed by the blue glow of the monitors. He scanned the room, face unreadable, eyes sharp. "I don't like games," he said quietly, "but if you want to play, at least make it interesting." Clara didn't move. After a long pause, Julian sighed, then turned and left, the door hissing shut behind him. Clara exhaled, barely. Back in her quarters, she opened the encrypted files on her private laptop, bypassing the failsafes using her mother's cipher. The truth unraveled before her eyes. The Seraphim Initiative had been a sustainable energy blueprint meant to undercut global monopolies. It was revolutionary, and it had been buried by Julian's father. The man had stolen her mother's work, scrubbed her name from the patent, and forced her into silence. Her family's downfall had been orchestrated from the very boardroom Clara now scrubs daily. She leaned back, fire spreading in her chest. This wasn't just about legacy anymore. It was about justice. Meanwhile, in Julian's office, he sat in darkness. He'd reviewed the footage, rewound it, paused, zoomed. Clara, or whoever she really was, had entered the server room, briefly, efficiently, like she'd done it before. There was something in her eyes, not fear, not greed, determination. And something else he hadn't expected, pain. Julian poured himself another drink. It was time he stopped pretending. She wasn't a cleaner, and he wasn't going to stay silent anymore. He picked up his phone and issued a command to security. "Bring her to me." Clara stood at the edge of Julian Vale's office, shoulders squared but heart racing beneath her blouse. She'd been summoned, not as a cleaner, not as the invisible girl in overalls, but by name. Clara Bennett. Not Miss, not employee, not even you there, just Clara. Julian didn't look up at first. He stood by the window, one hand in his pocket, the other holding a glass of dark amber bourbon, his back to her like a sculpture chiseled from disdain and mystery. The silence clawed at her. He finally said, "You broke protocol." His voice was cool, but it carried an undertone of curiosity. Clara's jaw tightened. "I was lost. On the 40th floor? In the server room?" She said nothing. Julian turned, slowly. His gaze swept over her, not lasciviously, but surgically, peeling back layers she tried hard to keep sealed. You don't belong with mops and buckets. Neither do secrets in a vault. A spark passed between them. Dangerous, familiar. He walked to his desk, placed the glass down with deliberate care. You accessed confidential files. She met his eyes. What are you going to do? Fire me? I should. But you won't. That stopped him. She stepped forward. Because you're curious. Because part of you wonders why a nobody like me would risk her job to sneak into a server room. And I'm not a nobody. His jaw tightened. Then who are you, Clara? She reached into her pocket. From it, she pulled a faded photo. Her mother, standing beside a younger version of Julian's father. The same corporate gala, the same smiles, the same betrayal. Does this look familiar? He stared at it, and for the first time his expression cracked. A twitch, a muscle pulling at the corner of his mouth. Recognition. Elizabeth Bennet, he murmured. My mother, Clara confirmed. The woman your father erased. Julian didn't deny it. Instead, he lowered himself into his leather chair, steepling his fingers. She was brilliant, but reckless. She was silenced. By my father, not by me. Clara leaned forward. Then prove it. Later that night, Clara sat on her cot in the staff quarters, the USB drive hidden inside her shoe again. Her thoughts swirled like storm clouds. Julian had promised her time, to investigate, to explain. But time wasn't safety. He could be playing her, testing her, or worse, protecting something far bigger than either of them. She didn't trust him. And yet, she couldn't shake the way he'd looked at her. Not with suspicion, but with recognition. With something like guilt, or longing. In his private quarters, Julian poured himself another drink. The whiskey didn't burn enough. She wasn't just a threat. She was truth. Walking, breathing, and more dangerous than she realized. Elizabeth Bennet had been brilliant, and Clara had her fire and her fury. Julian stared at the photo she'd left behind, then at the old file he'd secretly pulled from his own archives. The project was real, and his father had destroyed it. Julian picked up his phone. Begin phase 2, he said. Julian's order was barely 3 words, but it echoed through the marble halls of Vale Industries like a secret detonator. Begin phase 2. Across the city, encrypted systems flickered to life. Hidden files unlocked. A forgotten project, buried beneath years of lies and ambition, started to breathe again. And Clara Bennet? She was the match. Back in the staff quarters, Clara was pacing. Her nerves were fraying. She had expected Julian to react with fury, denial, maybe even have her removed from the building. But instead, he'd let her go. Worse, he'd listened. That wasn't how people like him worked. Unless he wasn't just protecting himself. He was protecting her. A knock on the door startled her. Clara rushed to hide the USB again, but it wasn't a guard. It was Rose, the head of staff. Miss Bennet, Mr. Vale wants you to accompany him to the private annex. Immediately. Clara blanked. For what? He didn't say, but he made it clear it's not a request. The annex was a part of Vale Industries most employees didn't know existed. Accessible only by a private elevator with a fingerprint scan and voice authentication. When the doors opened, Clara found herself in a sleek, minimalist room with floor-to-ceiling glass overlooking the entire city. Julian was standing at the edge of the balcony, wind tussling his hair. He didn't turn when she approached. You knew about Project Solace, he said softly. You knew more than you should. I pieced it together from what your father tried to erase, she replied, standing beside him. He glanced sideways at her. You're not here to blackmail me?
Clara smiled faintly. Not yet. That earned her a small, reluctant smirk. He stepped inside, motioning to a secure room behind a sliding steel door. Come with me. Inside, the temperature dropped. Monitors lit up along the walls, displaying data streams, schematics, prototypes. This, Julian said, pointing at a central file, was my mother's project. Clara's eyes widened. Your mother? She was a biotech engineer. She built the foundation of Project Solace. My father hijacked it, twisted it into something darker, something meant for control. Clara leaned closer to the screen. This code, it's hers. It matches my mother's. Julian nodded. They worked together, before everything fell apart. Clara's heart pounded. Why are you showing me this? Because we have the same enemy. Outside the annex, a figure watched through a security feed. A man with gray temples and a scar across his cheek. Lionel Vale, Julian's father. He turned to his assistant. We underestimated her. What should we do? He narrowed his eyes. Watch. If she gets too close, we remind her what happened to her mother. That night, Julian offered Clara a deal. 1 week. Full access to the project. No lies, no surveillance. But you stay in the mansion, he added, voice low, for protection. Clara tilted her head. Is that a command or an invitation? Does it matter? She studied him, her voice steady but her pulse racing. You think I'm safe under your roof? He didn't blink. I think I'm the only reason you're still alive. Later, in her temporary guest suite, miles above her old cot in the staff quarters, Clara stood at the window in a silk robe, staring down at the glittering city. Julian Vale, for all his coldness, was unraveling, and underneath, something raw and haunted was surfacing. She wasn't sure if she wanted to help him or expose him, but she knew one thing. The truth her mother died protecting was finally clawing its way back to the light, and she would follow it, no matter the cost. The storm arrived just after midnight. Not a storm of rain or wind, but of locked doors creaking open, of secrets Julian Vale could no longer hide, and Clara Bennett's past unraveling with every step deeper into the shadows of Vale Industries. Clara sat in the executive archives, a cold, windowless room buried 5 floors beneath the public-facing offices. The vault door behind her clicked shut as Julian keyed in a complex sequence. She'd expected metal shelves and forgotten boxes. Instead, she saw a museum of pain. Hard drives, old terminals, retinal scan locks on drawers. Everything was frozen in time. A decade of secrets sealed in this place. Why does this even exist? She asked, her voice echoing. Julian moved with cold precision, retrieving a case. Because my father never destroys anything. He only buries it. He placed the case in front of her. This belonged to your mother. Clara's hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were notebooks, her mother's handwriting unmistakable. Scientific diagrams, journal entries, a photograph tucked between the pages. 2 women standing side by side in white lab coats. Her mother and Julian's mother. Clara exhaled slowly. They weren't just colleagues, they were friends. Julian sat beside her. For once, the calculating CEO seemed, well, human. When Project Solace was pure, they dreamed of healing the nervous system, restoring memory, helping trauma victims. But then Lionel got involved. He didn't want healing, he wanted rewriting. Clara looked up sharply. That's why she ran. Julian nodded, and why mine didn't survive. Outside, Lionel watched the security feed in silence. The assistant beside him fidgeted. Shall we intervene? No, Lionel growled. Let them think they're winning. When they open the final partition, it'll all come undone. He smiled darkly. She's just like her mother, brilliant, naive, and disposable.
That evening, Julian and Clara walked through the greenhouse above the annex. Neither of them spoke for several long moments. The air was thick with the scent of night jasmine. Rain clattered gently against the glass ceiling. You're not who I thought you were, Clara said quietly. Julian turned to her. Neither are you. She gave a wry smile. We're both wearing masks. He stepped closer. Maybe it's time we took them off. His voice was raw, not commanding, not arrogant, just honest, like it hadn't been in years. The silence between them cracked, and in that crack, something real sparked. But Clara didn't reach for his hand. She turned instead and looked at the rain. Later that night, alone in her suite, she read her mother's final entry. If this reaches you, Clara, never trust the name Vale. But if you must, Trust the one who bleeds to protect the truth. Clara closed the journal, tears lining her eyes, and then she knew. Julian Vale wasn't her enemy, but someone close to him still was. Clara didn't sleep that night. She paced the length of her suite, barefoot on cold marble, her mother's journal clutched tightly in her arms. The words repeated in her head like a warning bell, never trust the name Vale. But Julian had bled for her, protected her, and beneath the CEO's polished exterior, she'd seen something real, a man breaking apart under the weight of a legacy he didn't ask for. At dawn, she made her decision. Julian stood on the helipad atop the Vale Tower, his coat flaring in the wind. From here, the city looked so small, tiny lives, unaware of the war waged above them. Clara stepped beside him, her breath caught in the cold air. He didn't look at her. "You read it, didn't you?" "Yes," she said, "all of it." "And you believe it?" She hesitated. "I don't know what to believe, Julian, but I know you're not your father." Finally, he turned. His eyes were tired, bloodshot. "That's the problem, Clara. I'm afraid I am." In the boardroom later that morning, Lionel Vale stood before his empire. The board of directors sat like statues, fearful and complicit. "My son has allowed sentiment to cloud his judgment," Lionel declared, tossing a manila folder on the table. "This girl, Clara Bennett, is not just an intruder. She's the daughter of a traitor who sabotaged Project Solus and stole millions in research." Clara stood near the door, flanked by 2 guards. Julian stormed in. "Enough!" Lionel's eyes flared. "This doesn't concern you anymore." Julian stepped between Clara and his father. "It concerns me more than ever. She's not the threat. You are." Lionel's mouth twitched into a cold smile. "And what will you do with your noble truth, Julian? Burn the company to the ground?" Julian's voice trembled, not with fear, but fury. "If that's what it takes." That night, Clara stood in the archives once more. Julian opened a hidden drawer. Inside, a recording device, still intact after all these years. Clara pressed play. Her mother's voice filled the room, tired, defiant, whispering into a future she might never see. "If anyone finds this, you must expose Lionel Vale. He's turned Solus into a weapon. He will not stop. My daughter, if you are listening, remember who you are. Your name is Clara LeClaire." Clara staggered back. Her name, not Bennett, LeClaire. The truth crashed down like thunder. She was the heir to the LeClaire dynasty, the empire her mother built, the one Lionel Vale tried to erase. Julian stepped beside her, voice low. "You're not just a girl with a mop anymore." She turned to him, fire in her eyes. "I never was." The morning press conference was called in secret.
Clara stood at the back of the media hall in a fitted black suit, no longer a maid, no longer invisible. Her mother's journal sat in her purse, a silent witness to the moment her legacy would be reclaimed. Julian stood at the podium, flanked by security. His tie was slightly loosened, his jaw set. He didn't look like a CEO anymore. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. "I've called you here today," he began, "not as the acting CEO of Vale International, but as a son, a witness, a survivor of everything this company has done behind closed doors." Gasps, murmurs, cameras flashed wildly. "I have proof," Julian continued, "of Project Solus, the cover-ups and the silencing of dissent, including the murder of Dr. Elise Leclaire. The files will be made public. Starting now, I resign as CEO, and I am launching an independent investigation into the corporate crimes committed by my own father." The room erupted into chaos, and through it all, Clara never took her eyes off him. Hours later, back at Vale Tower, the building trembled with tension. Lionel Vale was nowhere to be seen. But the vultures were circling. Julian met Clara in the archive room again, where it had all started. His hands trembled as he handed her a keycard. The hidden vault, 58th floor. It holds the original Project Solus prototypes, blueprints, audio logs, your mother's legacy. She stared at the key. "You trust me to carry it?" "I trust you," he said softly, "because I love you." Clara blinked, and then a whisper, "You shouldn't." She took the private elevator alone. Each floor she passed felt like another chapter of her life falling away. The poor girl with a mop, the fake fiancé, the daughter of a scientist, an heir. On the 58th floor, the vault awaited, steel and coated. She slid the keycard through. Click. Inside, the air was cold, stale, forgotten. Clara stepped into the silence of history and stared at the truth, laid bare in metal and glass. Cryogenic capsules, data drives, a prototype of Solus with her mother's handwriting etched on the casing. She broke, not in fear, in fury. Downstairs, security alarms blared. Julian ran through the corridor, heart pounding. Lionel had arrived. Surrounded by private guards, looking every bit the villain he denied being. Julian blocked the elevator doors. "This ends today," he spat. Lionel's voice was calm. "You were never strong enough, son. That's why you needed her. That's why you'll both burn." In the vault, Clara activated a broadcast console. Live. To the world. She stood before the prototype, voice strong. "My name is Clara Leclerc, daughter of Elise Leclerc. I was hidden, erased, but not anymore. I have proof that Lionel Vale turned a renewable energy miracle into a weapon and silenced anyone who dared stop him, including my mother." Millions watched, as did Julian, as did Lionel, as did the board. That night, helicopters circled the tower. Federal agents stormed in. Lionel Vale was arrested, and the world began to unravel a legacy built on lies. Clara stood alone on the rooftop, wind whipping her hair, the city lights blinking like stars. Julian found her. Neither of them spoke, until finally, Clara whispered, "I don't know who I'm supposed to be tomorrow." Julian touched her hand. "Start with being mine." She didn't pull away. For once, she didn't have to pretend. The headlines came fast. Vale Empire crumbles overnight. Heiress Clara Leclerc breaks silence. Project Solus exposed. From maid to CEO, the hidden daughter who toppled a giant. Clara sat alone in her late mother's lab the morning after the arrest. The vault was now a crime scene, sealed with yellow tape, guarded like a museum of regret. But this room, this space of quiet science and whispers, was hers now. She opened her mother's journal once more, letting her fingers trail the faded handwriting. Every formula, every margin scribble, every little heart drawn beside her own name as a baby, it grounded her, humanized the legacy she'd been forced to inherit. Behind her, the door creaked open. Julian entered, not in a suit, but in jeans and a simple white shirt. It struck her then, he was no longer pretending either. "I didn't expect to find you here," he said gently. Clara smiled faintly. "This is the only place that doesn't feel like it's lying to me." He walked to the desk, glancing at the scattered notes. "The board's in chaos. They're trying to appoint a new interim CEO. And they want it to be you?" she guessed. He didn't answer, just looked at her instead. "Or you," he finally said. Clara looked at him in disbelief. "Me? You were the one who exposed everything. You carry Elisa's blood and her vision. But I'm not a businesswoman. You weren't a window cleaner either, and yet you cleaned up this whole damn empire better than any of us could." They both laughed softly. It felt unreal, like breathing for the first time. Later that day, Clara walked into the boardroom for the first time, not as a maid, not as a fake fiancé, not as a pawn in someone else's power game, but as herself. The room was full of the men and women who had once overlooked her, ignored her, ordered her to fetch coffee.
Now, they watched in stunned silence as she placed the original Solace prototype on the polished table. "This is the future," she said clearly. "Not greed, not weaponization, not power for the few. Clean, sustainable energy, just as my mother intended. And if this company can't stand for that, then it deserves to fall." There was a beat of silence. Then, one by one, heads nodded. Votes were cast. Unanimous. Clara Leclerc, acting CEO of Vale International. That night, Julian met her on the balcony of her mother's old penthouse. Snow drifted lazily in the cold air, and the city stretched out below like a sea of lights. "You know," he murmured, "when I first met you, you were scrubbing the floor near my office. I didn't even look twice." "I remember," Clara said. "You stepped over me." "I was a fool. You were a shield, until you weren't." They stood in silence for a while, just watching the snow. Then he turned to her. "Do you ever regret it, pretending to be someone else?" "No," Clara whispered, "because somewhere in the pretending, I found out who I really was." He reached for her hand, his fingers trembling. "And who is she?" he asked. Clara turned, eyes glistening. "She's the daughter of a visionary, the woman who brought down an empire, the mother of a child who deserves better, and maybe, just maybe, someone who's learning how to love." Julian pulled her into his arms. No more roles, no more lies, just real feelings, real people, and a love born in the ashes of power. Winter faded slowly that year, reluctant to leave. Snow still capped the Vale towers, and frost still kissed the windows each morning. But inside the boardroom, Clara brought spring. Her leadership was unconventional. She refused the penthouse office, choosing instead to rebuild from Elisa's old lab. She didn't bark orders, but listened. She didn't restructure to protect profit. She restructured to protect people. And with every decision, the world began to see the new Vale, the real one. Julian became her closest advisor. Not in title, he'd turned down the co-CEO offer, but in presence. He was always beside her, at first for Elijah, then for the mission, and then for reasons neither of them said out loud. But something simmered, something beautiful, something terrifying. One afternoon, after a tense meeting with international investors, Clara stood alone in the garden terrace Elise once adored. She wore a soft ivory blouse tucked into high-waisted trousers, a far cry from her former maid's uniform. And yet, she still felt like that girl sometimes, still wondered if this was all borrowed, if it could be yanked away with one misstep. Julian found her there, holding a cup of tea that had gone cold in her hands. "You look like you're holding the world in that teacup," he said with a gentle smile. Clara glanced up. "Maybe I am." He stepped closer. "Clara." "Don't," she whispered. "Not yet." He nodded, though something in his jaw tightened. "Okay, but let me just say one thing." She met his gaze. "If loving you means standing still until you're ready, I'll wait a lifetime. But don't ever think I don't feel it. Every time we breathe the same air, I feel it." Her breath caught. The silence between them was louder than thunder. Then he stepped back, giving her space. Not because he wanted to, because she deserved it. That night, Clara tucked Elijah in. He was growing fast, already calling Julian Jules and chasing him through the halls like a little storm of laughter. "Is Jules your boyfriend, Mommy?" Elijah asked innocently. Clara froze, smoothing his blanket. "Why do you ask that?" "Because he looks at you the way Mr. Panda looks at Mrs. Fox in my book." She laughed, touched her son's forehead. "Go to sleep, baby. No more foxes." But in the dark, she sat by the window for a long time and thought about what love looked like. Days passed. Julian left on a brief trip to Zurich for Vale's European relaunch. Clara found herself restless, checking her phone more than she should,
watching the front gate when she wasn't supposed to care. When he returned, she was in the garden again. This time, she didn't look away. This time, she walked right up to him. "You're back," she said softly. "I said I would be." There was a pause. Then she reached for his hand, something she hadn't done since the gala. "I'm tired of being brave in boardrooms," she whispered. "I want to be brave with you." He stared at her. And then, like gravity finally gave in, they fell into each other. No warning, no hesitation. His lips on hers. Her fingers tangled in his coat. The wind caught the trees, but the earth held them steady. Two people, once fractured by lies, rebuilt by the truth. That evening, the headlines shifted again. Heiress Leclerc and billionaire Blackwell, a love forged in ruins. But for Clara, it didn't matter anymore. What mattered was that when she looked at Julian, she didn't see a fake fiancé. She saw a man who waited when she needed time, who fought when she wanted peace, and who finally kissed her like the world wasn't watching. Because under all the secrets, beneath all the stories, they were always just two hearts, beating beneath the same sky. The morning after their kiss, the mansion didn't feel like stone and glass anymore. It felt like a beginning. Clara woke to golden light and the sound of Elijah's laughter echoing down the hall. Somewhere, Julian was probably letting him climb all over the kitchen counters again, pretending to be the worst babysitter and best friend. She smiled to herself. But as she dressed for the board meeting that would finalize the Veil merger, a strange heaviness settled in her chest, a stillness before a shift, as if the air around her was holding its breath. And by noon, the storm arrived. It started with a phone call. One of the house staff, a woman Clara trusted, came into the meeting, her expression pale. "There's a man outside. He says he's your uncle from France." Clara's blood ran cold. She stood slowly. "What's his name?" "Lucien Leclerc." The name hit her like a blade. She hadn't heard it since the night her father disappeared, since the empire collapsed, since the family splintered into silence and shame. Lucien had vanished when Elise died, and now he was back? Why now? Clara met him in the library. He looked older, leaner. His once black hair had turned mostly silver, and there were lines on his face that hadn't been there when she was a child. But his eyes were the same, calculating, sharp, unreadable. "Clara," he said with a slight bow, as if they were meeting at a royal function and not at the scene of a betrayal. "I thought you were dead," she said coldly. "I thought you were lost," he replied, tone casual. "Turns out you've been here all along, playing maid in your own house." She said nothing. Lucien smiled. "Your mother's company is nearly whole again, and now you've replaced her too." Clara narrowed her eyes. "Why are you here?" He leaned forward. "To take back what's mine. Veil belongs to the Leclercs. You're just a girl who found the keys." By the time Julian arrived, Clara was already trembling. Not from fear, but from fury. Julian stepped between them without hesitation. "You have no authority here, Mr. Leclerc." Lucien glanced at him, smirking. "And you must be the watchdog, the fake fiancé." Julian didn't blink. "Try me." Lucien chuckled and turned back to Clara. "You can either sign the transfer papers and walk away, or I'll bring everything down. Lawsuits, scandals, even that child of yours. Don't test me, Clara. I know how to break a legacy." Clara stared at him. Then she said the one thing he didn't expect. "You already did." That night, Clara sat on the same snowy balcony where she had once faced Julian in silence. This time, he joined her without a word. "He thinks I'm still that little girl who was afraid of losing everything," she murmured. Julian touched her hand. "You're not." "I want to fight," she said, "but I don't want to become him." "You won't.
he said firmly, because you already changed the story. You turned a lie into a life, and you're not alone anymore." Their fingers intertwined. The snow kept falling. The next morning, Clara called a press conference. She walked into the flashing lights in a fitted black pantsuit, her hair tied back, eyes steady. Julian stood behind her, and Elijah watched from the wings with his nanny, gripping his stuffed fox. Clara stepped to the microphone. "My name is Clara Leclerc," she began. "I am not a scandal. I am not a mistake. I am the daughter of Elise Vale, and I am here to reclaim her vision, not her vengeance." The room fell silent. "I was once a girl who cleaned these windows. Now I lead what's behind them. If anyone wants to challenge that, they can meet me in the boardroom." The applause was thunderous. Lucian never even showed up. That evening, as the house quieted, Julian found her in the garden, barefoot in the grass, wine in hand, dress loose, curls falling. "You terrify me sometimes," he said, smiling. Clara looked over her shoulder. "Why?" "Because I've never loved someone who could burn down the world and still smell like lavender." She laughed softly and walked into his arms like she belonged there, because now she finally did. The morning sun broke over the estate like a benediction. Clara stood at the edge of the private terrace in a flowing ivory robe, coffee untouched in her hand, her gaze fixed on the skyline beyond the valley. From here, she could see the future, and it looked nothing like the past. Below, preparations for the Vale Foundation's relaunch gala were already in motion. White tents, floral arches, journalists with credentials. But inside her heart, something softer was happening. She wasn't just unveiling a company, she was unveiling herself. No more pretending, no more hiding. She was done with borrowed names and borrowed lives. Julian found her just as the wind picked up. He wore a charcoal suit, no tie, sleeves rolled to his forearms. Handsome, yes, but more than that, solid, steady, like the anchor he had been through the chaos. "Ready?" he asked. She looked at him, then down at the ring nestled in her palm. It wasn't the heirloom Lucian had tried to claim. It wasn't about family or legacy or pressure. It was about choice, her choice. She took his hand and slid the ring into it. "I don't need a crown," she said softly. "I just need this." The gala began at dusk. A string quartet played. Lanterns floated in the reflecting pool. Clara wore a champagne gold gown with a back so low it left her spine bare, and her chestnut hair twisted like a flame. As she stepped up to the stage, a hush fell. "Tonight," she said, "we open a new chapter, not just for Vale Industries, but for every woman who's ever been told she doesn't belong in a boardroom, or a ballroom, or a battlefield." Applause roared. Julian stood in the wings, hands clasped behind his back, smiling in a way he never had before. Proud and in love. Later that night, away from the cameras and champagne, Clara stood barefoot in the garden where it had all begun. She turned as Julian approached, his steps slow, purposeful. "No tux?" she teased. He shrugged, didn't want to upstage the heiress. "I'm not an heiress," she said, walking toward him. "Not anymore?" She shook her head. "Now I'm just Clara, and I'd like to stay that way." Julian reached for her hand. "And what about me?" She didn't answer. She just kissed him. Slow, deep, certain. Because some answers don't need words. Weeks later, the world would hail her as the youngest female CEO in the conglomerate's history. Magazines would feature her face, strong jaw, soft eyes, fiery heart. Some would say she was lucky, others would say she was ruthless. Only a few would ever know she once scrubbed the marble floors of that mansion in silence. Even fewer would know the truth, that the window cleaner didn't steal the empire. She was the empire. And the man who stood beside her, he didn't rescue her. He saw her, loved her, followed her, and in the end, chose her.